There are moments in life when invisibility hurts more than any word ever could. When you're standing right there, present, breathing, alive, but nobody really sees you. When your voice becomes a whisper that gets lost in the noise of indifference. And the worst part? When this happens inside your own family. For years, I was just grandma, the woman with white hair who baked cookies, who smiled at family gatherings, who always had a warm hug to offer. My children and grandchildren treated me with that condescending affection, you know the kind? The type of love that comes with pats on the head, as if I were an adorable child but incapable of understanding adult things. At family meetings, when the conversation turned to money, investments, or business, I simply ceased to exist. They talked about me, never to me. Grandma doesn't understand these things, they'd say with condescending smiles. Let her sit quietly with her knitting. And I let them. I stayed there quiet, while my heart tightened every time they reduced me to a decorative figure, every time they ignored my opinion, every time they treated me as if my 70 years were synonymous with irrelevance. Have you ever felt this way? Like you've become transparent inside your own home? Like everything you built, everything you lived through, held no value whatsoever to the people you love most? Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Your presence here already makes all the difference. The lump in my throat grew with every dinner, every meeting, every time they interrupted me mid-sentence to talk about something more important. I felt my chest tighten, as if I'd been holding my breath for years, as if I were disappearing little by little, becoming just a shadow within my own story. But there was something they didn't know, something I'd kept silent for so long that even I had almost forgotten the weight I carried. Something that, when revealed, would turn upside down that entire family dynamic that suffocated me. Because while they saw me as the naive grandma who didn't understand serious matters, I was building a silent empire, an empire worth more than all their salaries combined. What happened to me could happen to any woman who's been underestimated, diminished, treated as if her value had an expiration date. But what I did after this revelation completely changed not just my life, it changed the way my entire family saw me. And maybe, just maybe, it will also change the way you see your own power. By the end of this story, you'll understand that being underestimated can be the greatest advantage anyone can have, that strategic silence is worth more than 1,000 arguments, and that the most powerful revenge isn't anger, it's absolute success. Because on that day, when I opened my investment folder on the dinner table, everything changed, and they never called me just grandma again. It started on a Tuesday evening, one of those ordinary evenings that you never imagine will mark the beginning of everything. My son Michael had invited the whole family over for dinner. His new promotion, he said. Vice president of sales at some tech company I'd heard him mention 100 times, but never really paid attention to. He was proud, and I was happy for him. A mother is always happy for her children's victories, even when those same children treat her like a relic from another era. I arrived early, as I always did, carrying my famous apple pie. The one everyone praised but nobody really valued because in their minds, making pie was all I was good for. I walked into that house I knew so well, the house I'd helped them buy with a small loan they never knew wasn't actually that small. I walked into the living room where photos of my grandchildren smiled from the walls, grandchildren who called me when they needed something but rarely just to talk. "Grandma's here," my daughter-in-law Sarah announced, in that high-pitched tone people use when talking to the elderly or pets. She took the pie from my hands as if I might drop it at any moment, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and promptly returned to her conversation about vacation homes in the Hamptons. I sat in my usual corner, the armchair by the window, the one nobody else wanted because it was old and worn, but that I loved because from there I could see everything. I could watch my family interact, see who was happy, who was pretending, who carried worries they wouldn't share. Being invisible has its advantages. People forget you're there and say things they'd never say otherwise. Michael arrived with his chest puffed out, his new tie, his smile of someone who'd conquered the world. My other son, David, was already there with his wife and 2 teenagers who couldn't tear their eyes from their phones. My daughter, Jennifer, came in last, as always, complaining about traffic, about her boss, about life in general. Dinner was served, roasted chicken, glazed vegetables, expensive wine they opened without offering me any because Grandma doesn't drink. I do drink, actually. I just learned long ago that refusing certain things is easier than correcting wrong assumptions. The conversation flowed predictably. Michael talked about his promotion, about his new salary, about the Tesla he was planning to buy. David complained about private school costs and how expensive everything had become. Jennifer lamented her stagnant career and how she felt underpaid and undervalued. And there I was, chewing my chicken in silence, listening to my children talk about money as if it were the most complicated thing in the world. As if I, who'd lived through a depression, who'd raised 3 children on a secretary's salary after their father left, who'd learned to turn pennies into dollars out of pure necessity, couldn't possibly understand. "Mom, you're so lucky you don't have to worry about these things anymore," Jennifer said suddenly, looking at me with that mix of pity and relief. "Your generation had it easier. A simple pension and you're all set." I almost choked on my wine that I'd secretly poured for myself when no one was looking. Easier? My generation had it easier? I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. But I did neither. I just smiled that smile I'd perfected over the years. The smile that says nothing while holding everything inside. "Yes, dear," I said softly. "I'm very lucky." "Grandma lives in a simpler world," Michael added, as if I weren't sitting right there. "She doesn't understand investment pressure, market fluctuations, all this modern stress we deal with." David nodded. "Exactly. In her time, you just saved your pennies in a piggy bank and that was enough." They all laughed. A comfortable laugh, the kind shared by people who think they're on the same side, who think they understand how the world works while others don't. And I laughed with them, because that's what I'd always done. I laughed at jokes at my own expense. I accepted being diminished because confrontation seemed worse than invisibility. But something inside me cracked that night. Maybe it was the wine I wasn't supposed to be drinking. Maybe it was the accumulated exhaustion of years being treated like a sweet, silly old woman. Maybe it was simply time. "How much are you making now with this promotion, Michael?" David asked, cutting another piece of chicken. $250,000 a year plus bonuses," Michael responded, unable to hide his pride. "Wow," Jennifer sighed. "I'm stuck at 90,000 and feel like I'll never get out of there." "And you, Dave?" Michael asked. 180,000, but with 3 kids in private school and a mortgage in Westchester, I'm basically broke every month." They continued talking numbers, comparing salaries, complaining about taxes, about costs, about how hard it was to maintain their lifestyles. And I sat there, invisible as always, holding inside me a secret that suddenly felt too heavy to carry alone any longer. I thought about my small apartment they thought was cute, about my simple clothes they thought were appropriate for my age, about my quiet life they thought was peaceful because I had nothing else. I thought about the investment portfolio I'd been building since I was 30 years old, about the stocks I'd bought when nobody thought a secretary could understand the stock market, about the real estate I'd acquired in neighborhoods everyone said would never appreciate, about the Bitcoin I'd bought in 2011 when my grandson laughed and said it was money for nerds. I thought about the financial statements I received every month, statements that showed numbers that would make my children's eyes pop out, numbers they couldn't even imagine, numbers that represented not luck, not inheritance, but decades of smart decisions, calculated risks, and a discipline they never thought I possessed. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes, and comment where you're watching us from. Your story matters too. And then, in that moment, while they laughed and compared their financial struggles as if they were gladiators in an arena, I made a decision that would change everything. I set down my fork carefully, the way you do when you're about to do something that can't be undone. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. After years of staying quiet, of swallowing words, of making myself smaller so others could feel bigger, I expected my hands to tremble, but they were steady, firm, ready. "I need to tell you something," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their conversation like a knife through butter. They all stopped talking. All eyes turned to me. I could see the surprise on their faces. Grandma never interrupted. Grandma never demanded attention. Grandma just sat quietly in her corner and smiled. "What is it, Mom?" Michael asked, his tone already tinged with that impatience people have when they're interrupted during something they consider important. I reached into my purse. The same old leather purse they'd tried to replace countless times with something more modern, not understanding that I kept this one because it was paid for, because it was practical, because I didn't need to prove anything with a designer bag. From inside, I pulled out a folder. A simple manila folder that contained papers that would shatter every assumption they'd ever made about me. "I've been listening to you talk about money," I said, placing the folder on the table, right next to the gravy boat. "About your salaries, your struggles, your financial stress. And I realized something. I realized that you all think I don't understand. That I'm just a simple old woman who doesn't know how the world works." "Mom, that's not..." Jennifer started, but I raised my hand. For the first time in years, I raised my hand and someone actually stopped talking. "Let me finish," I said, and my voice had a quality I barely recognized. It was firm. It was clear. It was the voice of a woman who'd been silent for far too long. "You think I live a simple life because that's all I can afford? You think I dress modestly because I don't have options? You think I'm lucky to have a small pension that covers my basic needs?" I opened the folder. Inside were statements, bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, stock certificates, papers that represented a lifetime of decisions they knew nothing about. "This," I said, pulling out the first document, "is my investment portfolio with Vanguard. Current value, $3.2 million. The silence that fell over that dining room was deafening. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. You could hear someone's phone buzzing in another room. You could hear the sound of jaws dropping, though that might have been my imagination. "This," I continued, pulling out another paper, "is my real estate portfolio. 4 apartment buildings in Brooklyn, bought between 1985 and 2003, when everyone said Brooklyn was a wasteland. Current combined value, approximately $7 million. Monthly rental income, $45,000. Sarah's wine glass slipped from her hand. It didn't break, just tipped over, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Nobody moved to clean it. "This," I said, my voice never wavering, "is my stock portfolio. Apple stocks I bought in 1997 when everyone said the company was dying. Amazon stocks from 1998 when people laughed at the idea of buying books online. Tesla stocks from 2012 when everyone said electric cars were a joke. Current value, $5.8 million. Michael's face had gone pale. David looked like he might be sick. Jennifer's mouth was literally hanging open. "And this," I said, pulling out the final document with a small smile I couldn't quite suppress, "is my cryptocurrency wallet. Bitcoin I purchased in 2011 at $8 per coin, and again in 2015 at $200 per coin. Current value approximately $4 million. I looked around the table at my children's faces, at my grandchildren who had finally looked up from their phones, at my daughters-in-law who suddenly seemed to be seeing me for the first time. "My total net worth," I said calmly, folding my hands over the papers, "is approximately $20 million, give or take a few $100,000 depending on market fluctuations." The silence stretched. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. It was as if I'd frozen time itself, suspended that moment in amber where everything they thought they knew about me shattered into a million pieces. "But how?" Michael finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "How?" I repeated, and now I couldn't help but smile. "The same way anyone builds wealth, son, through discipline, education, patience, and making smart decisions over time. While you all were busy assuming I was just a simple secretary who didn't understand money, I was reading every investment book I could get my hands on. While you thought I was just knitting in my corner, I was studying market trends, learning about real estate, understanding technology before most people even had email." "Why didn't you tell us?" Jennifer asked, and I could hear something in her voice. Hurt, maybe, or betrayal. "Why didn't I tell you?" I set down my napkin, taking my time, letting the question hang in the air. "Tell me, Jennifer, when was the last time you asked me about my life? Really asked, not just 'How are you, Mom?' while scrolling through your phone. When was the last time any of you treated me like I had something valuable to contribute beyond cookies and grandmotherly advice?" Nobody answered, because they couldn't, because the truth was sitting right there on the table between us, impossible to deny. "I didn't tell you because you never asked. You never wondered. You just assumed. You assumed that because I'm old, I'm irrelevant. That because I'm your mother, my only value is in taking care of you. That because I don't brag or show off, I have nothing to brag about." David found his voice. "But Mom, $20 million. You're living in a small apartment, driving a 10-year-old car, shopping at discount stores. Why?" And this was the question I'd been waiting for. This was the moment where I could finally explain what they'd never understood. "Because I don't need to prove anything to anyone," I said simply. "I don't need a mansion to feel successful. I don't need a luxury car to feel important. I don't need designer clothes to feel beautiful. I spent my whole life learning that real wealth isn't about what you show, it's about what you have. It's about security, freedom, options. It's about knowing that whatever happens, I'm going to be okay." I looked at each of them in turn. "It's about being able to help my children when they need it, even when they don't know I'm helping. Do you think that down payment loan for this house, Michael, was from some bank's special program? It was from me. Do you think Jennifer's law school tuition was fully covered by scholarships? I paid the difference. Do you think David's business didn't fail 10 years ago because of lucky timing? I bought enough of your product through shell companies to keep you afloat until you found your footing. Tears were streaming down Jennifer's face now. Michael had his head in his hands. David was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. And maybe he hadn't. Maybe none of them had. I've been supporting this family from the shadows for decades, I continued, my voice softer now but no less firm. Not because I wanted gratitude, not because I wanted recognition, but because that's what mothers do. That's what love looks like. It's quiet. It's constant. It's invisible until suddenly it's not. I don't understand, Sarah whispered. Why reveal it now? Why tonight? I gathered my papers, putting them carefully back in the folder. Because tonight, listening to you all talk about money like it's some mysterious force that controls your lives, like you're all victims of circumstance, I realized something. I realized that by staying quiet, by letting you underestimate me, I wasn't protecting you. I was enabling you. I was teaching my grandchildren that it's okay to dismiss people, especially women, especially older people, because they might not fit your idea of what success looks like. I stood up, pushing my chair back. And I realized that maybe the greatest gift I can give you isn't more money or more help or more silence. Maybe it's the truth. The truth that your mother, your grandmother, this woman you've been patting on the head for years, built an empire while you weren't looking. Built it not through luck or inheritance or some man's help, but through her own intelligence, her own work, her own vision. I picked up my purse, leaving the folder on the table. That folder contains copies of everything. I want you to look at it, study it, learn from it. Because here's what I want you to understand. Every single one of you is capable of so much more than you think. Every single one of you has been playing small, just like you thought I was. The difference is, I was playing small by choice. You're playing small because you believe that's all you can be. I walked toward the door, and for the first time in years, everyone watched me go. Really watched. Saw me. Not as decoration, not as the little old lady in the corner, but as a person. A powerful person. A person who'd been hiding in plain sight all along. I didn't go straight home that night. Instead, I drove to the park near my apartment, the one where I used to take my children when they were small, back when they looked at me with wonder, when they thought I knew everything, when my words mattered. I sat on a bench under the streetlight and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back at that dinner table. Relief, fear, liberation, grief, all of it washing over me in waves. You need to understand something. Revealing that truth wasn't easy. It wasn't some triumphant moment where I felt nothing but pride and vindication. Part of me wanted to take it all back. Part of me wanted to go back to being invisible, because being invisible was safe. Being invisible meant I didn't have to face their shock, their questions, their potential resentment. But another part of me, the part that had been suffocating under years of being dismissed, felt like I could finally breathe. My phone started buzzing, text after text. Michael, Jennifer, David, even Sarah. I turned it off. They could wait. For once, they could wait for me. I thought about my journey, about how I became the woman who could walk away from that dinner table with $20 million in assets while they sat there stunned. It wasn't luck. It wasn't inheritance. It was something much more powerful than that. It was determination born from necessity. When my husband left, I was 32 years old with 3 children under 10. He didn't leave much. A house with a mortgage we couldn't afford, a car that barely ran, and a pile of bills he'd hidden from me. The shame of that moment, of having to call my own mother and admit my marriage had failed, of having to ask for help, of having to move my children into a tiny apartment because we lost the house. That shame could have destroyed me. Instead, it forged me. I remember the exact moment I decided to take control. I was sitting in that cramped apartment, my children asleep in the one bedroom we all shared, looking at my paycheck from my secretary job. $450 for 2 weeks of work. Rent was $350. That left $100 for food, utilities, clothes, everything else. I could have despaired. I could have given up. I could have decided that this was my lot in life, to struggle forever, to just survive. But something in me refused. Something in me said, no, this isn't the end of your story. This is the beginning. I started reading. Everything I could get my hands on from the library. Books about investing, about real estate, about building wealth. My coworkers thought I was crazy. Why are you reading that stuff, they'd ask. That's for rich people, not for people like us. But that was exactly the mindset I refused to accept. The idea that wealth was for other people. The idea that knowledge had a price tag only certain people could afford. Knowledge was free at the library. All I needed was time and determination. I started small. So small that it seemed almost pointless. I took 10% of every paycheck and put it away. 10% of $450 is $45. $45 when you only have $100 left after rent seems impossible. My children needed shoes. The electricity bill was due. The car needed repairs. But I did it anyway, because I'd read that consistency beats amount every single time. I'd read that the difference between people who build wealth and people who don't isn't how much they make. It's what they do with what they make. Some weeks I couldn't save the full amount. Some weeks I could only save $20. But I saved something. Always something. And I never touched it. Never. That money wasn't for emergencies. That money was for my future. For our future. After a year, I had $2,000. It doesn't sound like much, does it? But to me, it was a fortune. It was proof that I could do this. That I wasn't helpless. That I had agency over my own life. I took that $2,000 and I bought my first investment. A small rental property that needed work. Everyone thought I was insane. You can barely afford your own rent, they said. What are you doing buying a property? But I'd done my homework. I'd studied the neighborhood. I'd calculated the numbers. I knew that if I could rent it for just slightly more than the mortgage payment, I'd have an asset that was paying for itself while building equity. I did the repairs myself. Painted the walls, fixed the leaky faucet, replaced the old carpet with something clean and simple. My children helped. They didn't understand what we were doing, but they helped their mother on weekends, painting and cleaning, turning a rundown place into something livable. I rented it out. $350 a month. My mortgage payment was $290. That $60 difference felt like winning the lottery. But more than that, I had done something impossible. I had leveraged debt to create wealth. I had turned $2,000 into an asset, and I kept going. Every month, that rental income plus my savings went into my investment fund. After another year, I bought a second property, then a third, then a fourth. My children grew up watching this, but they didn't understand what they were watching. They saw their mother working constantly, choosing cheap clothes over nice ones, saying no to things they wanted, living frugally when other kids had more. They saw sacrifice, but they didn't understand the strategy behind it. By the time they were teenagers, I owned 6 properties. My investment accounts were growing. I'd started putting money into stocks, carefully, conservatively at first, then with more confidence as I learned and understood. But I never told them the numbers. I never said, "Look what I'm building," because I didn't want them to rely on it. I didn't want them to think, "Mom has money, so I don't need to work as hard." I wanted them to build their own strength, their own independence, their own success. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe by hiding my success, I taught them to underestimate not just me, but themselves. Maybe I should have shown them that their mother, a woman abandoned by her husband, dismissed by society, was building an empire brick by brick. But I can't change the past. I can only work with the present. My phone buzzed again. I'd turned it back on. A text from Jennifer. Just 2 words. "I'm sorry." I stared at those words for a long time. Sorry for what? For underestimating me? For treating me like I was irrelevant? For never asking about my life beyond surface pleasantries? All of the above, probably. I typed back, "Come have coffee with me tomorrow. Just you and me." She responded immediately. "What time?" 10 o'clock. That little cafe on Maple Street. I'll be there. I put my phone away and looked up at the stars. You could barely see them in the city, but they were there. Just like my strength had always been there, even when nobody could see it. Even when I couldn't see it myself sometimes. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you a strange kind of power. People don't see you coming. They don't protect themselves against you because they don't think you're a threat. They speak freely around you because they think you don't understand. They reveal themselves because they think you're not paying attention. But I was always paying attention. I was always learning. I was always growing. Just quietly. Just invisibly. I thought about my grandchildren. About how they'd looked at their phones during dinner until I dropped my revelation. About how they'd never asked me about my life, my past, my experiences. To them, I was just the old woman who existed to love them, to bake for them, to give them birthday cards with $20 bills inside. $20 bills. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could have given them each thousands, tens of thousands, but I gave them $20 because I wanted them to learn the value of money. I wanted them to understand that wealth isn't about how much you have, it's about what you do with it. Did they learn that lesson? I wasn't sure. But maybe now, after tonight, they would start to. I drove home slowly, taking the long way, past the apartment building where I'd lived when my husband left. It was still there, looking almost exactly the same. A little more worn, a little more tired, but standing. Like me. I thought about the woman I was then, terrified and alone with 3 children and no idea how she'd survive. If I could go back and talk to her, what would I say? I'd tell her that she's stronger than she knows, that the pain she's feeling right now will transform into power, that every choice she makes, every sacrifice, every moment she chooses discipline over comfort is building something magnificent. That one day, she'll sit at a dinner table surrounded by her grown children and reveal a truth that will change everything. That one day, she'll matter. Not because others finally see her, but because she finally sees herself. Jennifer was already waiting when I arrived at the cafe. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept. Her eyes were red, and I knew she'd been crying. My maternal instinct kicked in immediately, the urge to comfort her, to tell her everything was fine, to make the pain go away. But I resisted, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone sit with their discomfort. I ordered my coffee, black, the way I'd always drunk it. Simple, no frills. She had some elaborate latte with oat milk and caramel. We sat across from each other at a small table by the window, the morning light streaming in, making everything feel exposed and raw. I don't know where to start, she said finally, her voice breaking. Start anywhere, I said gently. I'm listening. I've been thinking all night about every conversation we've ever had. Every time I cut you off. Every time I treated you like you didn't understand. Every time I made decisions about your life without asking what you wanted. She paused, wiping her eyes. Mom, I've been so awful to you. You haven't been awful, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. You've been human. You've been operating on assumptions like we all do. The difference is, now you know those assumptions were wrong. But why? She asked, and I could hear the genuine confusion in her voice. Why did you let us treat you that way? Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you show us who you really are? I took a sip of my coffee, considering my answer carefully. Do you remember when you were 16 and you wanted to get your driver's license? She looked confused by the change in subject, but nodded. You failed the test the first time. Remember? You came home crying, saying you'd never be able to drive, that you were too stupid, that everyone else could do it, but you couldn't. I remember, she said quietly. And what did I do? You made me practice. Every day. You sat in that passenger seat while I drove around the neighborhood over and over until I could do it in my sleep. And what did I tell you? She smiled slightly through her tears. You said that the only way to learn something is to do it yourself, that you couldn't drive for me, that I had to build my own confidence behind the wheel. Exactly, I said. And that's what I've been doing your whole life, Jennifer. Not just with you, but with all my children. I've been sitting in the passenger seat, letting you drive your own lives. Making my own mistakes seemed less important than letting you learn from yours. But we thought you didn't know anything, she said. We thought you needed our help, our guidance, our protection. I know. And sometimes I let you think that because it made you feel needed. It made you feel capable. Do you know what happens to children whose parents solve every problem for them? They never learn to solve problems themselves. They never develop that muscle of resilience. She was crying harder now. But you could have showed us. You could have taught us what you knew. All those years of knowledge, of experience, of success, and you just kept it hidden. Did I asked. Or did you just not see it? How many times did I try to give you advice about money and you brushed me off? How many times did I suggest you save more, invest differently, think long-term? And you smiled and patted my hand like I was a child who didn't understand the complexities of modern life? She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it, because she remembered. I could see it on her face. She remembered all those moments. I tried to teach you, I said softly. But you weren't ready to learn. You thought you already knew everything. You thought that because you had a college degree and I didn't, because you worked in a corporate office and I worked as a secretary, because you were young and I was old, that somehow you had more to teach me than I had to teach you. I'm so sorry, Mom. I know you are. But I don't want your apology, Jennifer. Or rather, I don't just want your apology. I want your attention. I want you to really think about why this happened, because it's not just about me and you. It's about how we, as a society, treat older people, especially older women. I leaned forward, my voice taking on more intensity. When did I stop being a person to you and become just a role? When did I transform from Margaret, a complex human being with thoughts and dreams and capabilities, into just mom, just grandma, just the sweet old lady who bakes cookies? She didn't answer because she couldn't, because the truth was uncomfortable. I'll tell you when, I continued. It happened gradually, so gradually you didn't even notice. It started when my hair turned gray. Suddenly, strangers spoke to me more slowly, as if I couldn't understand normal speech. It accelerated when I retired. Suddenly, I wasn't a working professional anymore. I was just someone filling their days with hobbies. It solidified when I became a grandmother. Suddenly, that was my entire identity. Not Margaret, who built a real estate empire. Not Margaret, who understood the stock market better than most financial advisors. Just grandma. Just the woman whose value was in her relationship to you, not in herself. Jennifer was listening intently now, really listening, maybe for the first time in years. And the thing is, I said, I let it happen. I could have fought it. I could have insisted on being seen. But there's something exhausting about constantly having to prove yourself, about having to justify your existence, your intelligence, your worth. Sometimes it's easier to just accept the role people give you, especially when those people are your own children. But you're angry, she said. You have every right to be angry. I'm not angry, I said. And I meant it. I'm disappointed. I'm sad. I'm frustrated. But I'm not angry. Anger would imply that I think you did this maliciously. I don't. I think you did it unconsciously. I think you absorbed societal messages about aging and about women and about value, and you applied those messages to me without even realizing it. I finished my coffee and signaled for another. Do you want to know the worst part? It's not that you underestimated me. It's that by watching you underestimate me, my grandchildren learned that it's okay to dismiss older people, that it's okay to assume that age equals irrelevance. And they'll carry that belief into their own lives, and one day someone will do it to them. How do we fix this? Jennifer asked. How do I fix this? You start by seeing me, I said simply. Really seeing me. Not as a role, not as a function, but as a person. You ask me questions about my life. You listen to my answers. You stop assuming you know what's best for me and start trusting that I know what's best for myself. You introduce me to your friends as Margaret, not just as your mom. You talk about my accomplishments, not just my relationship to you. She nodded, taking it all in. And you teach your children differently, I continued. You teach them that every person, regardless of age, has value. That wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from living. That the elderly aren't decorations or burdens or cute accessories to your life. They're people who've survived decades of challenges you haven't faced yet. They're people who have knowledge you need. I will, she promised. I swear I will. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping our coffee, watching people pass by the window. Young people, old people, people of all ages going about their lives, each one carrying stories nobody else knew. Can I ask you something? Jennifer said finally. Anything. What are you going to do with all that money? I smiled. What do you think I should do with it? I don't know. Travel? Buy a bigger apartment? Finally get that luxury car everyone thinks you should have? Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'll keep living exactly as I am. Because I like my life, Jennifer. I like my small apartment. I like my old car. I like shopping at discount stores and finding treasures. I don't need to change my lifestyle to validate my success. But you could have anything. I already have everything I need. The money isn't about buying things. It's about security. It's about freedom. It's about knowing that whatever happens, I'll be okay. That if I need care when I'm older, I can afford it. That if one of you needs help, real help, I can provide it. That if I want to support causes I believe in, I can. You've already helped us, she said. All those times we didn't know about. And I'll probably help you again, I said. But from now on, I want it to be different. I want you to know. I want you to see that help as what it is. Not as luck or coincidence or some program, but as your mother making a choice to support you because she can. Because she built something that allows her to. Jennifer reached across the table and took both my hands. Thank you, Mom. Not just for the money, for everything. For raising us, for supporting us, for being strong even when we didn't see it, for finally showing us who you really are. You're welcome, sweetheart. But remember, I didn't change. I was always this person. You're just finally seeing me. We finished our coffee and walked out into the bright morning. The city was alive around us, full of people rushing to work, to appointments, to lives they thought were so important. And maybe they were. But I'd learned something that most people never learn. That the most important thing isn't how busy you are or how much money you make or what car you drive. It's whether you're living authentically, whether you're true to yourself, whether you're building something that matters. Over the next few weeks, something shifted in my family. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like a movie where suddenly everyone sees the light and everything is perfect. Real life doesn't work that way. Real change is slow, uncomfortable, and requires constant effort from everyone involved. But there were moments, small moments that told me something fundamental had changed. Michael called me one evening, not to check in with his usual perfunctory, "How are you, Mom?" but to actually ask my advice about an investment opportunity. He explained the situation, the numbers, the potential risks, and then he waited, really waited, for my opinion, for my expertise. When I gave him my thoughts, he listened. He took notes. He thanked me genuinely, not condescendingly. David invited me to lunch, just the two of us, and asked me to tell him about how I built my portfolio. He wanted to know the mistakes I made, the lessons I learned, the strategies I used. We sat in that restaurant for 3 hours, and he didn't check his phone once. He was present. He was engaged. He saw me. Jennifer started calling me every Sunday. Not out of obligation, but because she wanted to talk. About her life, yes, but also about mine. She asked about my childhood, about my marriage, about the early years after her father left. She asked about my first investments, my biggest wins, my worst losses. She was piecing together the story of who I really was, not just who she'd assumed I was. My grandchildren were different too. My oldest grandson, Tyler, asked if he could interview me for a school project about successful entrepreneurs. Me, an entrepreneur. It was the first time anyone in my family had used that word to describe me. He came over with his phone to record, expecting maybe a 20-minute conversation. We talked for 2 hours. About risk and failure and perseverance and patience. About the difference between being lucky and being prepared when luck arrives. About the power of living below your means and the freedom that comes from not needing to impress anyone. When he left, he hugged me differently. Not the quick, obligatory hug of a teenager who'd rather be anywhere else, but a real hug. The kind that says, "I see you, I value you, you matter." But not everything was perfect. Some things got more complicated. Sarah, Michael's wife, started acting strange around me. Overly polite, overly careful. I realized she was intimidated. The power dynamic had shifted, and she didn't know how to relate to me anymore. I wasn't just the sweet grandma she could pat on the head. I was someone with more wealth and power than she'd ever imagined, and that made her uncomfortable. David's wife, Rebecca, had a different reaction. She became resentful. I could see it in her eyes during family gatherings. She thought I'd been deceiving them, lying to them. She made comments, little barbs disguised as jokes. "Must be nice to have secret millions while watching your family struggle. I guess some people enjoy watching others suffer." They stung because there was truth in them. I had watched them struggle, but not because I enjoyed it, because I was trying to let them grow. I had to have a difficult conversation with Rebecca. I invited her for coffee, just like I'd done with Jennifer. But this conversation was harder. She was angry in a way Jennifer hadn't been. She felt betrayed. "You let us stress about money," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "You let David lose sleep over bills, over the business, over providing for his family. And all along, you could have helped. You could have made it easier." "I did help," I said calmly. "More than you know. But yes, I let you struggle with some things. Because struggle builds character. Because easy money creates dependence. Because I wanted David to succeed on his own merit, to build his own confidence, to know that he was capable." "That's easy to say when you're sitting on $20 million, she shot back. "You're right," I acknowledged. "It is easy to say from my position. But tell me, Rebecca, if I'd given David everything he needed, if I'd solved every problem, paid every bill, removed every obstacle, what kind of man would he be today?" She didn't answer immediately. She was thinking. I could see it. "He's strong," I continued. "He's resilient. He's capable. He's built a successful business through his own effort, his own creativity, his own determination. If I'd robbed him of that struggle, I would have robbed him of that growth. Would you want to be married to a man who never had to fight for anything, who never had to prove himself, who never learned he could overcome obstacles?" "No," she admitted quietly. "No, I wouldn't. I'm not saying I was perfect," I said. "I'm not saying I made all the right choices. Maybe I should have been more open. Maybe I should have shared more of my journey with all of you. But my intentions were never to deceive or to enjoy your suffering. My intention was to raise independent, capable adults who didn't need my money to succeed. I understand, she said, though I could tell she was still processing. I just wish you'd trusted us with the truth. Trust goes both ways, I said gently. Did any of you trust me enough to ask about my life? To wonder if there might be more to me than what you saw? To consider that maybe I had wisdom worth seeking? She nodded slowly. You're right. We didn't. These conversations were exhausting. Necessary, but exhausting. Revealing the truth hadn't just changed how my family saw me. It had changed all the relationships, all the dynamics, everything we'd built over decades. We were having to rebuild from scratch. And rebuilding is always harder than building the first time because you have to clear away the old foundation first. But there were beautiful moments too. Moments that made all the discomfort worthwhile. My youngest grandchild, Emma, who was only 12, asked me to teach her about investing. She'd saved $87 from birthday money and allowance, and she wanted to invest it. We sat down together, and I explained the basics: risk and reward, diversification, long-term thinking, compound interest. Her eyes lit up with understanding, and I saw in her the same spark I'd felt all those years ago when I first realized that money could work for you instead of you always working for money. We opened a custodial investment account together. She chose 3 stocks after doing her own research. Disney because she loved their movies, Tesla because she cared about the environment, and Apple because she loved her iPad. Were they the best investment choices? Maybe not. But they were her choices, based on her reasoning, and she was learning. That was worth more than any return percentage. I started a monthly family dinner, not like the old dinners where I sat quietly in the corner. These were different. I led the conversations. I shared stories from my life, real stories, honest stories, about my failures and my successes, about the time I lost $15,000 on a bad investment and had to eat ramen for months to recover, about the time I almost gave up, almost sold everything, almost decided that trying to build wealth was too hard and too scary. They listened, really listened, and they shared too, about their own fears, their own struggles, their own dreams. We weren't performing for each other anymore. We were being real with each other. Michael admitted he felt like a fraud sometimes, like he didn't deserve his success, like he was always waiting for someone to discover he didn't know what he was doing. I told him everyone feels that way, that confidence isn't the absence of doubt, it's the decision to move forward despite doubt. Jennifer talked about feeling stuck in her career, about being afraid to take risks, about worrying that any wrong move would set her back years. I told her about the jobs I'd applied for and didn't get, about the investments I was too scared to make that would have paid off huge, about all the times I let fear win, and about the times I didn't, and how those were the times that changed everything. David shared that he was terrified of failing, of losing everything he'd built, of not being able to provide for his family. I reminded him that he'd already been through hard times, that he'd already proven he could survive and rebuild. That fear of loss often costs us more than actual loss ever does. We were becoming a real family, not a performance of a family, but an authentic, messy, complicated, beautiful family where people were allowed to be fully themselves. And me? I was finally being fully myself, not hiding anymore, not pretending to be smaller than I was, not dimming my light so others would feel comfortable. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. One evening, as I was leaving one of our family dinners, Tyler walked me to my car. "Grandma," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do you regret it? Keeping everything secret for so long?" I thought about his question carefully. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "There are things I would have done differently if I could do it again. But regret is a complicated emotion. If I'd revealed everything earlier, maybe you all would have grown up differently. Maybe you would have relied on me more, worked less hard, developed less resilience, or maybe you would have learned from me, been inspired by me, built even more than you have. I'll never know. But now that we know," he said, "what do you want from us?" It was such a perceptive question, such a mature question from a 17-year-old. "I want you to see possibilities," I said. "I want you to understand that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. That being underestimated can be a gift if you use it right. That building real wealth isn't about how much you make, it's about how much you keep and what you do with it. And mostly, I want you to never underestimate anyone, especially not based on their age or their gender or how they present themselves to the world." He hugged me. "I won't," he promised. "I'll never look at old people the same way again." I laughed. "Good. Because one day you'll be an old person and you'll want the young people around you to see your value too. As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. The masks were off. The pretending was over. For better or worse, my family knew who I was. 6 months after that dinner table revelation, I found myself sitting in my small apartment looking out the window at the city below. Nothing about my life had changed externally. Same apartment, same car, same simple clothes. But everything had changed internally. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer playing small. I was finally, fully, unapologetically myself. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. "Is this Margaret Henderson?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Mrs. Henderson, my name is Patricia Wu. I'm a financial journalist, and I've been hearing remarkable stories about you from your grandson, Tyler. He's been telling his friends about you, and one of those friends has a parent who works at our publication. I'd love to interview you for a piece we're doing on unconventional paths to wealth." I almost said no. My instinct was to retreat, to stay quiet, to remain in the shadows where I'd been comfortable for so long. But then I thought about Emma and her $87. About Tyler's promise to never underestimate people. About all the other women out there, sitting quietly in corners, hiding their power, shrinking themselves to make others comfortable. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I'd be happy to talk with you." The interview happened 2 weeks later. Patricia came to my apartment, and I could see her surprise when she walked in. She'd probably expected something different. A penthouse, maybe. Designer furniture. Obvious signs of wealth. Instead, she got my comfortable, modest home with its mismatched furniture and family photos on every surface. "This isn't what I expected," she admitted. "What did you expect?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I don't know. Something more ostentatious, I suppose. You have a net worth of $20 million, yet you live like someone making $40,000 a year. I live like someone who understands the difference between wealth and the appearance of wealth," I corrected gently. "I spent decades building real security, not an impressive facade. Why would I change that now?" We talked for hours. I told her everything. About my husband leaving. About the tiny apartment with 3 children. About reading investment books from the library. About buying that first rental property while my coworkers thought I was crazy. About every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, every small victory that built into something larger. "What do you want people to know?" she asked as we wrapped up. "If you could give one message to the women reading this, what would it be?" I thought about that question. Really thought about it. Because it wasn't just about money. It had never been just about money. "I want them to know that they're more capable than anyone has told them," I said finally. "That society has a way of making women, especially older women, feel invisible and irrelevant. But invisibility can be a superpower if you choose to use it that way. When people underestimate you, you can accomplish things they never see coming. When people dismiss you, you're free to build without their interference or their limitations." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "But more than that, I want them to know that it's never too late. I started building wealth at 32, after my life had fallen apart. I didn't have advantages. I didn't have a degree. I didn't have a husband's income. I didn't have family money. All I had was determination and a library card and a refusal to accept that my circumstances defined my destiny." "And what about the secrecy?" she asked. "Do you regret not telling your family sooner?" "I've thought about that a lot," I said. "The truth is, I'm not sure I could have told them sooner. They weren't ready to hear it. They needed to see me in a certain way, and I let them because I thought that was what love looked like. Sacrifice, self-diminishment, making yourself smaller so others could feel bigger. But I've learned that's not love. Real love is being authentically yourself and allowing others to be authentically themselves. Real love is honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable." The article came out a month later. "The Secret Millionaire Next Door: How One Woman Built an Empire While Everyone Thought She Was Just Grandma." It went viral. Suddenly, my phone was ringing constantly. Interview requests, speaking invitations, people wanting to know my secrets, my strategies, my story. It was overwhelming. I'd spent 70 years being invisible, and now suddenly everyone wanted to see me. It was everything I'd wanted and everything I'd feared. But the most meaningful responses weren't from journalists or financial experts. They were from women. Hundreds of women. Thousands of women. Women who wrote to tell me they'd been underestimated too. Women who'd been dismissed, overlooked, treated as if their only value was in serving others. Women who'd been hiding their own power, their own intelligence, their own capabilities. One letter in particular moved me to tears. It was from a woman named Sandra, 63 years old, recently divorced, terrified about her financial future. She wrote, "I always thought it was too late for me, that I'd missed my chance, that women like me, ordinary women without special skills or advantages, couldn't build real wealth. Your story showed me I was wrong. I've started reading, learning, investing. For the first time in my life, I feel like I have agency. Like my future isn't something that happens to me, but something I create. Thank you for being visible. Thank you for showing us what's possible." That letter crystallized something for me. The reason I'd kept quiet all those years, the reason I'd hidden my success, wasn't just about my children. It was about me, about my own fear of being seen, about not wanting to challenge people's assumptions because challenging assumptions meant risking rejection, meant risking people not liking me anymore, meant standing out instead of blending in. But staying invisible hadn't protected me. It had diminished me. And worse, it had deprived others of a model, an example, a possibility. I started doing speaking engagements, small ones at first, local libraries, community centers, women's groups. I talked about financial literacy, about investing, about building wealth slowly and steadily. But mostly I talked about the psychology of it, about overcoming the voices that tell you you're not smart enough, not capable enough, not worthy enough, about the specific challenges women face, especially older women, and how to navigate them. My family came to one of my talks. All of them. They sat in the audience and watched their mother, their grandmother, command a room of 200 people. Watched me speak with confidence and authority about topics they'd spent years assuming I didn't understand. Afterward, Michael said something that meant more to me than any applause. "I'm proud of you, Mom. Not because of the money, because of who you are. Because you refused to stay small even when we tried to make you small. Because you're teaching us, even now, even after everything, that it's never too late to grow." I created a scholarship fund for women over 50 who want to return to school or start businesses. I called it the Never Too Late Fund, because it isn't too late. Not at 50. Not at 60. Not at 70. Not ever. I started teaching a weekly class at the community college. Financial empowerment for women. We cover everything from basic budgeting to advanced investing strategies. But we also talk about mindset, about worthiness, about refusing to accept society's limitations. The class is always full. Women of all ages, all backgrounds, all coming together to learn how to take control of their financial futures. Emma, my youngest grandchild, is now 13. Her $87 investment has grown to $112. Not a huge return, but she checks it every week. She understands compound interest now. She understands patience. She understands that wealth is built slowly, decision by decision, day by day. The other day, she told me she wants to be a financial advisor when she grows up. "So I can help people the way you helped us," she said. "That's my real legacy. Not the $20 million, though, that's nice. Not the apartment buildings or the stocks or the Bitcoin. My real legacy is the shift in understanding. The knowledge that ordinary people, especially ordinary women, especially ordinary older women, are capable of extraordinary things. I still live in my small apartment. I still drive my old car. I still shop at discount stores. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because I've learned that happiness doesn't come from things. It comes from freedom, from security, from the knowledge that you've built something solid and real, from the ability to help others, from being truly, authentically yourself." The other day, I was at the grocery store, pushing my cart through the produce section, when I heard a woman talking on her phone. "I'm just so worried," she was saying. "I'm 58, I'm divorced, I have no savings, and I don't know what I'm going to do." I almost kept walking. It wasn't my business. I didn't know her. But then I thought about Sandra's letter, about all those women who reached out after my story was published, about the power of one person telling another person that there's hope. I approached her after she finished her call. "Excuse me," I said. "I couldn't help but overhear. I don't mean to intrude, but I was once where you are. Divorced, scared, certain I'd missed my chance, and I want you to know that you haven't. It's not too late." She looked at me, this ordinary-looking old woman in discount store clothes, and I could see the skepticism in her eyes. "I'm 72 years old," I continued, "and I have a net worth of $20 million that I built starting at 32, with nothing but a secretary's salary and determination. If I could do it, you can do it. It won't be easy, it won't be fast, but it's possible. I handed her my card, the one I'd had made after the article came out. It just had my name and email address. If you want to talk, reach out. I teach a free class on Tuesdays, and I'd be happy to see you there. She stared at the card, then at me, then back at the card. Are you serious? Completely serious. You have 10 good working years ahead of you, maybe more. 10 years of making smart decisions, of learning, of building. That's enough time to change everything. She started crying right there in the produce section. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting yourself be seen, I replied. That's what it all comes down to, really. Being seen. Seeing others. Recognizing that every person has depths we don't perceive, capabilities we don't acknowledge, potential we don't imagine. As I walked back to my car, I thought about that dinner table 6 months ago, about the shock on my children's faces, about the folder of documents that changed everything, about the decision to finally be visible. It was the scariest thing I've ever done. Scarier than being alone with 3 children. Scarier than making my first investment. Scarier than anything in my 72 years. But it was also the most liberating thing I've ever done, because now I live in truth. Now I move through the world as my full self. Now when I look in the mirror, I see myself clearly for the first time in decades. I'm not just grandma. I'm not just someone's mother. I'm not just a sweet old lady in the corner. I'm Margaret. I'm a woman who survived abandonment and built an empire. I'm a woman who was underestimated by everyone, including sometimes myself, and who proved them all wrong. I'm a woman who understands that real power is quiet, that real wealth is invisible, and that real strength often looks like softness until the moment you need it. And I'm a woman who finally stopped hiding. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you're too old, too inexperienced, too ordinary to achieve something extraordinary, I want you to know something. They're wrong. You have power they don't see. You have capabilities they don't recognize. You have potential they can't imagine. Don't wait for permission to be great. Don't wait for recognition to start building. Don't wait for someone else to validate what you already know deep down, that you're capable of so much more than anyone has told you. Start now, start small if you need to, but start. Read that book, make that investment, take that class, ask that question, speak that truth, be seen, be heard, be yourself, fully, authentically, unapologetically yourself, because the world needs what you have to offer. Your family needs what you have to offer. You need what you have to offer. And life is too short to spend it hiding in the corner, pretending to be less than you are, waiting for someone else's permission to shine. Subscribe to this channel for more real stories about real people who overcame real challenges. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been hiding, someone who's been underestimated, someone who needs to know it's not too late. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and if you're ready to stop hiding and start building. Because your story matters. Your voice matters. You matter. And it's time the world knew it.